Welcome to the Energy Transition Fireside Chat that we're having here with two top executives at National Grid, Badar Khan, President of National Grid US, and Nicola Shaw, President of National Grid UK. I also, before we get started, want to thank our hosts, the British Consulate in Boston, the British Consulate General of Italy in Boston, and Greentown Labs. National Grid is a principal partner of COP26 this year, which underscores how they're trying to drive ambitious change toward a clean energy future, both in the UK and here in the Northeast United States. And they have a unique insight on how achieving net zero is possible in the years and decades ahead. To meet the Paris Agreement's goals, we have to transition to clean power, we have to get at least 4 times faster in moving off of fossil fuels to green energy. And we're going to, as the economy comes back and demand for energy grows, the importance of decarbonizing it is going to be, I would say, underscored or highlighted. And we have to make sure that we're weeding ourselves off on the long term to meet the goals that we have here in Massachusetts, the goals that are set in Washington by the Biden administration, and of course the goals of the Paris Agreement. So today we're going to take a deep dive into what needs to happen. I think we're going to cover a lot of ground here. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Badar and Nicola have to say about this transition. So without further ado, I think I'd like to just dive right into the questions. I really want to hear what role, first sort of a broad question, what role do you think utilities can play in encouraging the use of renewable energy? I want to hear maybe specifically about what's happening both in National Grid in the US and in the UK. But then sort of more broadly, what are other things that you're thinking about, and what are things that other utilities are doing that you think are good ideas? I guess maybe we'll start with Nicola on that.
Wow, John, it's a big question. The good news is I think we've got lots of things to do. The first sort of element of that is how do we help everyone else? Because we're so important in the decarbonisation agenda. If you don't decarbonise electricity, then you can't decarbonise a lot of transport, electric vehicles, for example. If you don't decarbonise the way we create heat, then you don't deal with the next problem. So we've got to do both. And in the UK, we've certainly started on that. A lot of the things Governor Baker was talking about are similarly mirrored here, done a lot with renewables, and particularly offshore wind is a big opportunity as well as a big delivery already. We've delivered about 10 gigawatts of offshore wind now connected onto the grid in the UK, and we're going to get to 40 gigawatts of that just in the next decade alone. So you can see quite big changes to come. We're also doing quite a lot on electric vehicles. So I'm working on a big fast charging, ultra fast charging indeed, so that as you go into a service station along your long distance journey, you can charge up on route. Really important to people to think that their cars aren't just for local travel, but also for long distance travel. And we're also doing things in relation to heat. So I'm doing a lot of experimenting and practicing and thinking about hydrogen at the moment, building an off-grid facility, which includes a big transmission grid, so carrying hydrogen at high pressure, a distribution grid, kind of taking it down in pressure, and right up to the house. So we've built a whole facility to test blending of hydrogen at different levels into the grid. 85% of UK homes are heated with gas at the moment, so hence it's really important for us to move on to something else. And we think that'll be a mixture of hydrogen heating and electric heating in the future. So for some real kind of goals. The other things we're doing though are fixing our own house. In the UK, we have, like Governor Baker, made a commitment nationally to 2050 being our time to get to net zero. So we're fixing our own house in National Grid. And a couple of things I wanted to cite about what we're doing in the UK. First is we're really focused on bringing down the carbon in our construction projects. I have a lot of big construction work to do to connect all the renewables into the grid for people to use. And so we need to be using a lot of concrete. At the moment, that is full of carbon. So we're working with our suppliers to really change the way we deliver each of those projects. And then we've also done something. We've said, as a whole, the grid at the moment, occasionally we have more renewables than we have non-renewables. So we've really dialed down the coal combination in the UK, but we still have a lot of gas on the system generating electricity, and we have renewables. But we want to be in a place where we could operate that grid with 100% renewable, so only renewable energy generation by 2025. And that requires quite a lot more capacity, but also requires new commercial tools to make sure that the system balances. We have to keep supply matching demand at all times. So National Grid Electricity System Operator, one of our sister companies in the UK, is really focused on that.
Badar, you want to talk about what you're doing here in Massachusetts and the Northeast?
Yeah, thank you, John. It's great to be here. Well, I think as Nicola said, we are, we have also committed to reducing our emissions to net zero by 2050. And that includes not just the emissions from our own company, which we've actually lowered by 75% versus 1990 levels, but also the emissions from the sale of energy to our customers. Last year, we announced and published a 10-point net zero plan, which lays out the 10 areas that's the focus of our work over the coming years to decarbonize and reduce emissions across society. And that's things like you just heard from Nicola, so interconnecting renewables, offshore as well as onshore, utilizing storage, advancing clean transport, as well as new technologies to decarbonize and take the emissions out of heat. If I just talk about renewable energy, specifically to your question, clearly here in the US, we have seen and will need to continue to see significant investment in renewable generation. From our side, it's being able to connect all that generation to customers, whether that's offshore, as you heard from Governor Baker, a significant push for offshore wind on the East Coast, but also onshore renewables. On offshore, we've already signed contracts to procure 200 terawatt hours of renewable energy for our Massachusetts and Rhode Island customers. That's enough power to supply half our customers' consumption by 2026. So it's a significant amount of energy. We clearly need to make sure, however, that we're looking at smart and efficient ways of connecting all of the offshore wind farms when they get built, rather than connecting them one by one to the mainland. So that will require regional cooperation. Again, I think that's a theme that you heard from Governor Baker just a few minutes ago. In terms of renewable generation onshore, we've been busy connecting, I think it's now 90,000 solar solutions. So those are rooftop or ground mount solar across our territories. And on transportation, we've been big supporters of all plans to increase electric vehicles on the road. So we've installed over around 2,500 EV charging ports across our territories. We've worked on new rate designs to encourage off-peak charging and smart charging. We've launched a fleet advisory service to help our fleet customers think about accelerating electric vehicles across their fleet. We've got incentives and discounts for our employees. And with our regulators, we've now received approval for up to 20,000 charging ports over the next several years, which is an investment of $200 million. So I think when you look at across all these areas, there's a lot that utilities can and are doing, not just to decarbonize energy supply, but to get to emissions reduction across society broadly, both energy supply, transportation, as well as heating, as Nicola was saying.
Before we get into the next question, I wanted to bring up something that Nicola mentioned. There's some talk here about switching the natural gas heating system gradually over to hydrogen, but it's really hasn't gotten very far. It's sort of hypothetical. And I was wondering, Nicola, if you could tell me how it's working in the UK, and maybe Badar, if you could address, you did mention heating as one of your sort of decarbonization platforms. Maybe you could address whether you think it's feasible to switch to hydrogen heating here. So, but I'm really interested in hearing more about that transition in the UK, because they're obviously here. People are hungry for more, for some sort of solution that gets around the fact that we're so reliant on natural gas.
Yeah, no, John, it's a really great question. What in the UK, we have concluded now that we need to use hydrogen for heating. So we carry about 3 times as much energy in gas across the whole of the year as we do in electricity, which just kind of shows you the real impact of the winter. And our winter is less harsh than yours. So a real step up in demand for us in the winter for gas. And so we also use the network as a kind of storage system. So we keep a lot of gas in the system over the course of the year, so we're ready when the winter comes. So if you think about retail markets at Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's the same kind of thing. We have to ramp up in energy in the same way. So we've been doing a lot of thinking about whether it would be feasible to switch directly to electricity. And our conclusion in the UK is no, we'd need so much electricity and so much extra capacity in all of our transmission and distribution systems that we have to use both hydrogen and electricity for future heating. There'll be different solutions which are right for different places, depending on the level of insulation in the existing housing footprint and so on. So particularly better insulated houses will deal better with heat pumps than they will with a hydrogen solution. And then with hydrogen, we know that there's a lot to learn. So already in some places around the world, hydrogen is transported actively in transmission systems and distribution systems, but we haven't done it in the UK. We also haven't created enough hydrogen to be able to do what we want to do. And you can create hydrogen in 2 ways. You can do it from existing methane gas and separate it out and just take the hydrogen molecule. Or you can create it using hydroelectrolysis from water using renewable energy. And people at the moment are calling those blue and green hydrogen. We think probably you need both, because it's very expensive to create green hydrogen at the moment. The technology, I think, will fall in price over time. But at the moment, the cheaper form is the blue hydrogen. So with those things, what we're doing first is we're experimenting with testing with 20, 40, 60, 80% blending of hydrogen into the gas that we carry. And we know that all of our equipment in the homes can use a certain amount of that. As we get higher, we'll probably have to change some things about hydrogen. Boilers, for example, in people's homes will have to change, but they tend to age over 15 to 20 years and have a replacement cycle like that anyway. So there will be a point at which boilers will be sold hydrogen ready. And then we'll have to switch the networks over. And that's why we're building this test network in a remote part of the country. We're also doing some tests by converting universities. One university has converted totally in the UK to hydrogen. And then we'll have a hydrogen town. And the government has committed to having a hydrogen town by 2025. So quite a lot of work already been carried out.
Great. That's really encouraging. Badar, where are we here on this side of the pond, as they say?
Yeah, well, I think there's, I think one of the benefits of COP26 and bringing people together is that we can learn from what we're doing around the world. And I think there's, as you just heard from Nicola, clearly a lot of action around hydrogen and alternatives to natural gas for heating in the UK and Europe. You know, when I look at it in the US, across the 3 big sectors, so energy supply, transportation, and heating, you know, we need to make sure that the transition that we're going through, meets the goals that we've set, but is also affordable for all segments of society. And I think that for energy supply and transportation, you know, generally speaking, renewable energy is at parity with natural gas in many parts of the country. Electric vehicles, the total cost of ownership is increasingly getting there and will be there very soon as automotive companies expand the range to smaller vehicles. And battery cost technology continues to fall. On heating, natural gas is still the dominant form of heating. I think, as you know, John, over 60% of customers use gas, but it's also the most affordable form of heating today by a long way. And so we are exploring all pathways other than natural gas. So electrification, air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. We're looking at our renewable natural gas. so biogas. We're looking at hydrogen and blending it into the natural gas infrastructure in the way that Nicola's been talking about. So there's research and development going on with the national labs across the US. In our service areas, we proposed hydrogen demonstration projects, a little like the ones that Nicola's described. I would say they're really determining the feasibility, or the engineering and technical feasibility of being able to blend hydrogen. I think we've still got a long way to go to get the cost curves down to a place that's more affordable. But again, if I look at energy supply, so renewable energy or transportation, we've seen those cost curves when there's a focus and commitment over the last decade or more. And I'm confident that we will see those same cost curves, whether it's electrifying heat or renewable natural gas or hydrogen. I suspect in the long term we'll end up with multiple multiple pathways for different customer segments in different geographies.
Badar, that's you raise a point about cost, and this is something that often comes up in the debate about expanding renewable energy, and that's equity and inclusion. One thing I often hear here is that solar panels tend to be for people who are more well-to-do because they have the rooftops, the separate houses that can accommodate them. And obviously, there are community solar projects that can address that. But it's a dynamic that the industry is constantly facing and wrestling with. So I was wondering, Badar, maybe you could talk a little bit about how this kind of green transition, how to ensure equity and inclusion. I mean, I'm obviously talking about sort of making sure all communities can afford this transition, but I'm also curious about employment and making sure that the jobs go to diverse workers as well. And then Nicola, if you can say what's happening in the UK after Badar addresses it, that'd be great.
Sure, John. Well, first of all, I'm super excited to see the focus on environmental justice in this transition. I think that in societal transformations, I think as we sometimes see, it is the segment of society, so lower income communities, that actually stand to benefit the most, and yet are sometimes left behind. And so, as a regulated utility, we don't choose our customers, John. We serve everyone, and so one of our goals and roles is making sure that everyone benefits from this transition that we're all talking about. And so we're asking ourselves, is every segment of society benefiting from the programs, the thinking that we're talking about? Are we reaching disadvantaged communities? Are there barriers, as you just laid out, that might prevent people from accessing the program? So let me just give you a couple examples of some of the things that we're working on. On transportation, we know that Black, Asian, and Latinx residents are exposed to 30% more vehicle pollution than white residents. In Massachusetts, we're on track to install 1,000 of these vehicle charging ports. 70 to 75% of them are in publicly accessible locations, and 35% of them are in environmental justice communities. But we also know that not everyone is able to afford an electric vehicle today. But people can and do take buses. So we've been partnering with transit authorities in New York and in Massachusetts, and school districts in Massachusetts, to put buses, electric buses, on the road. In the fall, we rolled out our first electric school bus in Massachusetts, and we're looking to electrify more. In Massachusetts, we've also been looking at putting vehicle chargers that are mounted to our poles, our electric poles. These are, first of all, cheaper. They may not be the most attractive, but they're cheaper. They're more accessible for those people who don't have their own parking spot or their parking space to charge their, so people who live in high occupancy or multi-family buildings. We're getting ready to make our third phase filing with the regulators here in Massachusetts in our EV program this summer. And we've been consulting with something like 50 organizations to ensure that we are both reaching those communities that are disadvantaged and eliminating barriers. Energy efficiency is another example. We've been a leader in energy efficiency here in Massachusetts. Massachusetts as a state is a leader across the United States. If you look at our programs, we provide efficiency upgrades at low cost or no cost to low-income customers, including home weatherization. But not everyone's aware of the program. So again, we've been working on making sure these programs are actually reaching those customers that may not be fully aware of it. That includes, improving language access. And we're focusing on identifying the barriers, so people who are aware of it but can't access the program. So if you're renting a home rather than you own a home, or as a classic example, or if you don't meet some of the finance conditions that sometimes are required. And so we're working on eliminating all of those kinds of barriers for our customers. And I think if you look at our whether it's Governor Baker's plan or the Biden administration's whole of government approach to this transition, I'm pleased that we're taking an approach that encompasses all of our communities, and I think that's a very important part of this transition.
Great,
Yeah,
Nicola, you want to address what you're doing in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Badar said is very similar in the UK. I thought maybe I'd just touch on the jobs angle you were talking about, because we've done some work in the UK on how many jobs we're going to need, how many more jobs there will be in net zero over the next 3 decades, but also in particular over the next decade. So we reckon there'll be 400,000 more jobs required in energy in order to achieve net zero. About 112,000 of those just in the next 10 years. So we're doing quite a lot of work to think about where those jobs are, what kind of jobs. And the research we also have says everybody wants to be part of this. Having a purpose is hugely important, particularly for younger people. And both men and women want to join organizations that feel like they're committed to developing net zero, which is fantastic because it means there's a real opportunity to bring new talent in. And we need people with all sorts of different skills. People with skills in human interface, kind of talking to people, making sure that they understand all the things that Badar's just talking about are available to help make that transition. We need people who are good at AI, because we need some really new technology to really help us drive our understanding of demand and how that can be managed and the supply balance. And then we need people who are great engineers. So we continue to have to solve some quite thorny problems. We've talked about hydrogen, but there are multiple ones of those of different levels of complexity and organization. So kind of jobs for everyone in this space. And National Grid has a particular interest. We've established something called Grid for Good, which is us working both in Massachusetts and New York, and also in our territories in the UK, with communities to help those who are not actually succeeding at the moment, young people in particular who've been struggling with jobs through the pandemic, people who've been unemployed for some time and so on, trying to help them into the workforce. And we work with a number of different charities. We give people work experience, we give them training, and we help them to put themselves in a place to get a job in this new economy.
Great.
Can I just add? I think that on the jobs front, we operate inside an ecosystem. So National Grid doesn't operate, by itself. We invest across the United States $4 or $5 billion a year in our, improving and developing and constructing our transmission distribution networks. Our energy efficiency programs, for which we're a leader here in the U.S., are actually executed through a large number of contractors. And so as a company, we have a tremendous opportunity to create a huge impact on the issue of equity. There's a great organization here in Massachusetts that we've started talking to that's very focused on this question. They call themselves the Browning the Green Space. Which is an acknowledgement that the clean energy industry that exists today tends to be dominated by white men, and we need to get to a place where the jobs that Nicola's talking about, which will be very exciting across all areas of energy supply, transportation, offshore wind, etc., are made available to all communities. And so I'm very excited about partnering with organizations like that. Given the impact and the opportunity that we do have.
Great.
And it probably is obvious. I'm just going to build on what Badar said, but we're unusual, right? So you're talking to a white woman and an Asian man leading an energy business. That's unusual. And it's something that National Grid is proud of. We are absolutely seeking top down and bottom up to make change in the way people perceive energy businesses and the sense that people can have of these being great places to work for everyone. So I'm sort of reinforcing what Badar said and making it really bold and strong, because it is a really important part of who we are.
This week we're seeing the Biden administration roll out a lot of news for the clean tech industry. Badar, I was wondering if you could address what sort of the change in approach to carbon emissions, reducing carbon emissions in the White House. How is that? How would you say that's affecting what both utilities do and what states do in this regard?
Well, I think first we are delighted to see the U.S. re-enter the conversation, the global conversation, the local, national, global conversation on climate change, and I hope regain a leadership role in this debate. We're proud to see the U.S. is rejoining the Paris Agreement, something that we've always supported, and I think, as you said up front, John, we are a principal sponsor of COP26. I think, however, we are lucky here, at least for National Grid, to operate in states, so New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, where, frankly, our governors haven't really taken their foot off the pedal over the last several years, regardless of what's happening, in Washington, D.C. And so we've been supporting those goals. You've heard from Governor Baker. You'll know that there's an equally bold set of commitments in our other states that we serve customers in Rhode Island and New York. That said, I think there are things that do require federal cooperation and federal support, whether that's around incentives, whether it's around policy or legislation, that I think that we do need to see some leadership from Washington, D.C., and I'm really pleased to see that. I think that, as Governor Baker said again, sometimes these things require cooperation that expands beyond the borders of the states that exist in the U.S. And so that's an important part of, I think, what the Biden administration is promoting, and we're very supportive and happy to see that.
Nicola, maybe you could address, I'm not quite as familiar with UK politics. You could address what role government there plays in fostering clean energy.
So the UK government last year made a commitment to net zero by 2050 as well for the whole country. And at the end of the year, we got from the government 2 documents, really important documents. The first was a 10-point plan from the Prime Minister, setting out what he wants the country to achieve in all the areas we've been talking about: offshore wind, hydrogen, electric vehicles, and so on. And then a sort of more detailed document, what we call a white paper, from the relevant department, led then by Alok Sharma, who now leads the COP26. He's the COP26 president, saying what the department was going to do to enable that 10-point plan and to really help us convert. So again, sort of more detail about how the trials will be funded, what the models are for investment, and talking about all of the things we've just been discussing about fairness in the change. So really leading up, I think, to COP26, we'll be seeing another few documents leading on at each of those elements from the government.
John, I just want, just as you move on to the next question, or before you do, I think one of the important parts is investment in R&D and technology. And that's both in terms of technologies that we just spent a few minutes talking about, but I think it's also around how do we enable individuals to take choices and to make choices that they're not making today. So that, if you fast forward 10 years from now, so we're each of our states, and in the UK, we're very focused on what needs to happen by 2030. We need to see some pretty significant changes. So people like you and I need to be making choices around how we're, cooking our food, heating our homes, the vehicles we drive, the energy efficiency, the way that we're engaging with energy, and that requires a level of innovation at a consumer level that I think we're going to need to see. And I think we're seeing that kind of support from organizations like Greentown Labs, who've long been at these sorts of areas, but also from folks over in Silicon Valley and consumer technology companies. And I think that is an equally important part of this transition. So how do we get regular people to engage and make choices they're not making today, as well as the R&D and the technologies themselves.
Great. I was speaking of government. I am very curious how the UK has sort of gotten ahead of the US in terms of offshore wind, just in development of megawatts available. I mean, obviously, both of you know we really don't have much to speak of yet. We have two very small projects. National Grid was involved, obviously, in the one off of Block Island. But now we're trying to get utility scale projects up and running. UK had a jump start on that. I was wondering why that is, and what can the US learn from what UK has done. Nicola, you want to try that?
I'll say a little bit. I know that Badar is hugely well versed on this, so I'll just say a little bit and then hand over to him. So in the UK, I'd say we had a framework. The government set up a framework pretty early on to encourage investment and innovation in offshore wind. An island nation, that kind of helps. We've got a lot of water around us, so there's a driver to be there. And we're also quite proud of our natural landscape. So there was quite a lot of opposition to onshore wind. Quite a populated country, so not a lot of space, and that encouraged us to go offshore. And that we've got now a number of manufacturing plants for offshore wind blades in the UK. We've got the mechanisms for taking them offshore. We've developed them further. There's new innovation coming with even floating offshore wind farms. You can move around for where the wind is. So a real thought going in, and we've seen that level of continuous investment over now about a decade has really enabled the size to go up. We have bigger blades, which can therefore create more energy when the wind blows. But we've also seen the price come down because of the commitment and the sustained interest in that through a competitive process supported by government originally, now almost not supported by government, operating directly in competition with other forms of electricity. So it was a kind of dedicated government activity at a time when we knew we had to come away from coal for a range of reasons, including we didn't have enough coal available to be sustainable on our own. So we didn't have enough in the UK. So there was a concern about the sustainability of our electric sources if we were somehow cut off from a coal supply, as well as a desire to decarbonize. So it was a kind of double benefit.
Great. Badar, we have a couple of minutes. Maybe you can lend your insight on the lessons to be learned as we sort of follow Europe's lead in this department.
Yeah, I mean, we are clearly behind Europe on the development of offshore, but we've got very big goals, as you all heard from Governor Baker just now, but also from the Biden administration earlier this week. I think there are key lessons to be learned around the development of the supply chain, John. I think the way the supply chain has developed in Europe has been pretty impressive, and we need to see that same kind of development over here. The technology, I think, will be applied as we bigger blades, taller towers, as we start to develop these wind farms across the coast. I think the other key area that I think both sides of the Atlantic are still are kind of engaged on, and I think Europe's a little further ahead, is how do you connect all of these wind farms back to land? I think that's going to be a particular challenge. We have a lot of NIMBYs, like not in my backyard here, as you well know, and so we need to make sure that we don't end up with projects that just face coastal community lack of support. And so I think that's a key area that I think we all need to work on. But we are progressing. We, as you said, National Grid was involved with connecting the first commercially viable wind farm in the U.S. off Rhode Island. We are engaged with developers on connecting more offshore wind to onshore. So there's a lot of activity going on, and I think that we'll be able to take those lessons from Europe and apply them over here in the U.S.
Great. Thanks so much, Badar. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens here. And thanks both of you, Nicola and Badar, for joining us. This was really an interesting discussion. I'll just let people know up next in the program is we're looking at a panel, Driving to Zero, Transportation and Climate. So before we get there, the virtual stage, please enjoy a few featured climate tech videos from Enel, Green Town Labs, and the UK government's COP26 team. And again, thanks. It was great to see you, and this was a wonderful chat. I hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Jeff.
Thanks.
Every day, we are taking actions to tackle some of the world's biggest challenges. We believe that innovation and sustainability are the keys to solving the challenges of today and tomorrow. We are engaging the most innovative ecosystems around the world. We are working hard to enable businesses, organizations, and individuals evolve. We are developing the latest cutting-edge technologies for the future. We are committed to being more sustainable and responsible every day.